The short arm splint is used to immobilize fractures of the carpal bones, such as triquetral fractures and small non-displaced fractures of the distal radius or ulna. A small torus or greenstick fracture of the distal radius is depicted here. The short arm splint does not prevent supination and pronation of the forearm, and thus a sugar tong splint should be used for displaced and/or complex fractures of the distal radius and ulna. Additionally, the short arm splint does not provide adequate immobilization of the first metacarpal and scaphoid bone, and thus a thumb spica splint should be used for scaphoid fractures. Place the patient in the sitting position, with the shoulder and the elbow slightly flexed. Use a piece of 3 or 4-inch Webril to measure the required length of the splint. Measure from the distal palmar crease to a point 5 to 10 centimeters proximal to the elbow. Lay this piece of Webril on a bedside table, and then roll out an additional 3 layers to form the cast padding. Use 2 pieces of Webril to make the top layer, each offset from the previous layers by 50%. Next, roll out 8 to 10 layers of 3 or 4-inch plaster on top of the Webril. The plaster may be folded back and forth upon itself during this process. Soak the plaster in room temperature water until fully saturated. Raise the plaster from the bucket and remove the excess water by allowing the layers to gently fold down on themselves and then gently squeezing them. Lay the plaster down onto the cast padding and smooth it over with your hands. Fold the overhanging edges of the top layer of Webril over the plaster to form a single outer layer that will prevent the plaster from sticking to the elastic bandage. Apply the splint along the volar surface of the forearm and wrist, and use the palms of your hands to gently mold the splint to the extremity. Use 2 or 3-inch elastic bandage to hold the splint in place. Begin wrapping distally, and then proceed proximally toward the elbow. Place a moderate degree of tension to the elastic bandage during the application process. Once the elastic bandage is applied, again mold the splint using the palms of your hands. For most indications, the wrist and hand should be immobilized in the position of function, with the wrist extended to approximately 30 degrees. This position can be easily achieved by molding the splint between your thumb and index finger as depicted here. The thumb and fingers should not be immobilized by the short arm splint. Once the splint is applied, repeat a thorough neurovascular examination of the hand. This includes capillary refill and motor and sensory function of the median, ulnar, and radial nerves.